Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for the COSMO-ART conference to give me the opportunity to speak to you here. So I'm Léa Jobard, and I will talk to you about how I documented the rock art landscape in the Matobo Hills for my PhD project. So the Matobo Hills are in Zimbabwe. It's a 2,000 square kilometer granitic massif south of Bulawayo. It's circled in red in the map. It's forming a landscape of granitic hills and rather narrow valleys, as you can see in the pictures. And today, the Matobo Hills is classified as a UNESCO World Heritage, partly due to the omnipresence of rock arts, as there is around 4,000 rock art sites. The majority of these sites are attributed to later Stone Age hunter-gatherers, but rock art sites display a high degree of diversity. Diversity in terms of topography, as they are painted in different type of hills, in sites of different shapes, in different locations in the landscape, like at the bottom of the hills, at the top of the hills, etc. Variability in terms of compositions, as some sites are very densely painted, and some others have only a few images. And the variability in terms of at the scale of the images, so in terms of style, of techniques. There's different shapes of images as well, and many different themes. So diversity of human figures, diversity of animal species that are painted. There is also depictions of plants that you can see there, and other motifs such as the formlings that you can see in B. In addition to this, archaeological excavations made by Nick Walker and more recently by the Matobo Art program have shown that rock paintings date back to 13,000 years and was practiced throughout the later Stone Age. So the present landscape that we observe today, and here you have a map, and each white point is a site that was recorded. It is an accumulation of multiple painting events that span several millennia and resulted from different cultural groups who probably occupied their landscape differently and probably used rock art in varied ways. So my PhD research focused on the relationships between rock arts, the hunter-gatherers' rock arts, and their landscape, taking into account the Matobo Hills scale and the later Stone Age scale as a time frame. So just a note here, the landscape is understood as Tim Ingold defined it. It encompasses the topography, so the shape of the world and what is inside, but also the interactions, so social, economic, political, emotional, etc. interactions between the people, the hunter-gatherers, and this shape, this topography. And these interactions are, of course, situated in time and in space. So more precisely, what my project aimed to do, it was first to characterize the iconographic variability in terms of stylistic features and chronology, to characterize the variability of the painted sites, to assess their potential uses and functions, and to understand how rock art variability is distributed across time, space, and across the potential uses and functions. So to address these objectives, I needed an exhaustive dataset encompassing a wide diversity of motifs to analyze the stylistic variability of the iconography, chronological relationships between the motifs to assess their chronology, a wide range of sites to understand their variability in terms of morphology, location, and potential social experiences. And by social experiences, I mean which activities could have been conducted in the sites, who could have accessed the sites, how many people, was it easy to access or difficult to see, etc. And to contextualize this data, I would ideally have archaeological, paleoenvironmental, and ethnographic documentation to give a thorough context. However, when I began working on my PhD in 2019, the published documentation was limited. For example, there was no direct datings of the paintings, there was no paleoenvironment study that had been conducted, or no ethnographic documentation on the Matobo Hills. So to collect necessary data, it was planned that I would survey with the help of the Matobo-ART program in which I did my PhD. I would survey for several months in the field, but I faced logistical limitations because I was a foreign researcher and mostly COVID-19 pandemic happened. So these limitations led me to adopt a multi-source approach, combining unpublished survey archives from the researcher Nick Walker, GIS-based modeling, and 2 weeks of fieldwork. So in this presentation, I will outline how I built a robust iconographic landscape corpus to answer my objectives. So first, I worked a lot on Nick Walker's archives. To give you a bit of context, Nick Walker is an archaeologist who surveyed the Matobo Hills between the 1970s and the 2000s. And he was interested in every part of the forager's life. So he excavated a few sites and he surveyed the Matobo Hills. He published his results into this book in 1995. But it's mostly the results and not the raw data. Part of his archives and archaeological collection are preserved in the museum in Harare, but his field notes were stored in private hands, and members of the Matobo-ART program had access to them, scanned them, and with the approval of Walker, I could work on these unpublished archives. So, during his surveys, Walker produced 2 types of documents. First, here, he produced individual records for each of the 261 sites that he prospected, describing their morphology and their iconography. And then each sites were pointed on the map, it's a UTM map. And there are 6 of them that covers the Matobo Hills, and these maps are preserved at the museum in Harare. So I had this impressive data set, but I didn't know how it had been built, and I didn't know how I could rely on it for my study. In his book, Walker mentions 2 things. First, he selected a main research area, which is squared here, which covers 12 by 15 kilometer territory. And within this area, he organized systematic surveys. So I knew it was quite thorough surveys he conducted in this precise region. But I didn't know how, like he didn't say how he documented each of the variables he noted down. So to evaluate the accuracy of the data, I transcribed all the records. And at the same time, I created a database with all the variables he recorded to allow to quantify the data and to see how systematic his recordings were. So, for example, this is an example of the way he recorded morphology of sites. So he recorded typically like the name and the coordinates of the site, the morphology, dimensions, and for most of the site, he did a drawing of the profile of the site seen from the top. And with my database, I was able to see that on 261 sites, only 3 were lacking the mention of the morphology, and he drew 92% of them, but he measured the 3 dimensions of only a third of the sites. So this part of the record really allowed me to mostly document the morphology of the sites, which I needed for my study. The second part of the records describes the iconography visible at the sites where Walker listed the motifs, providing more or less details on the technique, shapes, themes, etc. So to assess this part and how accurate it is, I compared them to the photo mosaics that were done by the Matobo program team of sites that were very densely painted. Quality cameras, and all the pictures were also filtered through the stretch that you saw before in the previous presentations. And so basically, I took the photo mosaic, I displayed it on Photoshop, and then I took exactly what Walker wrote in his archives, and I put it on the mosaic to see if he missed motifs and how well he described the motif. So Walker identified really most of the motifs, and there was only 2 motifs that he didn't see, while they are quite visible to the eye, like these 2. But besides this, the motifs that he missed are difficult to see without this stretch. And conversely, there is instances where he saw motifs that I struggle to see without this stretch. So to give you an example, he drew this little hare, which is very badly preserved. It's 3 meters above ground level. It has very little contrast with the rock surface, and still he saw it. So it seems like he spent a lot of time observing the painted surfaces, and his goal was to be exhaustive. So now, concerning the stylistic characteristic of the motif, his approach was less systematic. Most of the motifs are described by their thematics, by their theme. And if it's part of a group like 3 animals, tout, etc. And the other attributes are actually described only if they are different from what is the most common features. So for example, he talks about a wildebeest or tout, etc., which are monochrome and red, and it's the most common features, but he will precise like a yellow eland with a face and neck, which are less common. So yeah. And concerning, and so he did this for the technique, the features of like the position of the figures, and if they had bags or bow and arrow or stuff like that. For the shape of the figure, he mostly had pre-established categories that he noted down, like this kind of human figure in the middle that he called the wedge people. So these he noted down, but otherwise he didn't really note this. So overall, this analysis of Walker iconographic inventory showed that I could really rely to get data regarding certain stylistic variables, and that I could assume some of the stylistic characteristics that he didn't note down. And after this analysis, I still needed to find data for the chronology dimension, sites location, and the potential social experience of the landscape. And for that, I used GIS. So for sites location, I had Walker's maps that were pictured, and I integrated them into GIS. It's a geographic information system. It allows to do spatial data storage, management, and analysis. And to analyze the terrain topography, I used a digital elevation model, a DEM. I don't know if everyone is familiar, but basically it's an image made of pixels, square pixels. Each pixel represents a plot of land and has a value, and the value is the average altitude of the plot of land. So the precision of the modelization of the terrain depends on how many pixels there is in the image, and there is a various service, online free service that provides DEMs, but they are all of a maximum resolution of 30 by 30 meters. So it represents plots of land of 30 meters. And the more precise ones are very expensive. So coupling GIS with Walker's maps therefore allowed me to gather data on the diversity of social experiences. So for example, I could modelize the site accessibility, visibility, and audibility of the sites. So I could analyze the variability of location, of potential social experience, but I still needed the relation, a chronological relation. So for that, I had to go on the field. So I'm accelerating because I have only 5 minutes. So because of the pandemic, my time on the field was only of 2 weeks, so we had to be very efficient, but I had two very nice team to help me. So I selected a few parts to survey, to check the Walker's archives in different places of his own study area. So this allowed to check his archives, but also to check that GIS was accurate and not totally disconnected from reality, because it's still modelization. And it also allowed me to record rock art sequences of superimpositions, so looking which one are on top of which, to then cross all the superimposition sequences. So all in all, this allowed me to build a very strong data set with a lot of data. So it allowed me to conduct quite a quantitative analysis, but I still didn't. Like the sole frame of my PhD didn't allow me to collect additional archaeological or environmental data, because it would require 2 other PhD, and ethnographic context or like local community context was difficult, because I had only 2 weeks on the field, and so the only frame of a PhD was really not enough to do this. But still, it allowed me to answer my objective, so I could build a first chronostylistic sequence of the Matobo Hills. I could analyze the different type of sites and propose some use and functions, such as landmark or possible aggregation camps. And by assigning each site to a chronological phase, I could also identify possible networks between the sites that happened at different time periods, and aspects of the social organization around rock arts, the symbolic practices, and how all of this could evolved through time. So to conclude, re-examining Walker's archives, so starting again from what was done before, and using it as a foundation of my study, allowed me to collect a very important amount of data sets. And in the main study area, most preserved sites were likely to be documented, giving me the most exhaustive data set I could hope for. And this was possible because Walker and his team surveyed the area daily for several months over 6 years, which is a big effort nowadays and can take 18 years to achieve. So it really also made my fieldwork very efficient to have this in the hands. Crossing multiple sources helped also to compensate the gaps of each, and the archives allowed to conduct quantitative. GIS was a precious tool to have a step back and really visualize the quantitative data in the space, and to think about it as relationships between sites, which is difficult to do just with a brain abstraction. Like, we need a tool to do that. But it also didn't replace fieldwork, because it's not the same to really experience the fields as to see it on a model, digital model. And finally, having to work on 1980s archives and GIS before being able to go on the field, which was a bit of a constraint at the beginning. it also forced me to constantly question the reliability of the data, and like how reliable was it to my research questions, and to be very critical about what I was doing. And as a final point, I would like to acknowledge I was grateful to access Workers' Archives, which saved me time and avoiding doing double work. But I realized that I partly reproduced the same issue because I didn't think before how I will share my database and my work. So now it's very difficult to make it available, compatible to other systems. So yeah, it's something I've learned, that I think from the beginning how to share your data afterwards. Thank you.
Merci, Léa. Any questions? I think I'm going to stick there.
Yeah, thanks very much. That was a great presentation. Yeah, some amazing images there. Yeah, you've highlighted something. So when you know, a lot of us have also encountered this. When you digitize someone else's records, you know, you demonstrated how thorough Nick's recordings were, but you stuck with the terminology that he's used to record. So now you've already down a path with that. So there's this that onion sort of what is the core that you can use for how you want to take something, how you're applying your research, versus the previous research's structure, and that contestation. It's very, very difficult, you know, to do all that work, digitize all of that, and then still crack on. You know, the project you've taken on is magnificent. It's such a big, I mean, you have serious guts to take on such a big question at a landscape level. But I think what you're trying to do is the beginning of not an end point. As you say, you had COVID, you had all sorts of constraints, unfortunately, that came in. So I would say the way forward on your project is how do you get this to be the start of really getting to that big question, because you've got the start of something really magnificent, and you've done some amazing baseline work, and I'm really excited to see what you're going to do over the next 20 years with this particular question. It's probably going to be that kind of hairy, long-term thing, because this is a really difficult question you've taken on.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, so at the beginning, it was really a bit like getting into the head of Nick Walker, of like the way he noted down stuff, even just his abbreviations and this stuff like this. And but as you say, he was a really good, at least a surveyor of rock art, and he didn't have, I think he had like a scientific way of doing stuff, and he didn't have too many preconceived categories in mind when he documented. So he didn't interpret so much maybe the art when he was noted it down, so it stays. So still he would say, for example, there is images that looks like a fox or a dog or something, and he would note down the species he thought it was. But then it's very easy to, when you understand how it works, it's quite easy to balance this thing and just say like a canine. Yeah. Yeah, I think his work was good enough for that. And the way forward, for me, it would be to build a database that would be updated to like how do you say, on like open, a bit like what you were doing, like to have categories that are not specific to the Matobo but could be used in other contexts to have more something usable by others.
Thanks, Léa. That was great. Great research. I mean, we could critique, you know, some of the categories that you have used, but unbelievable and very well timed, I think. I just want to understand, you noted at the end of your presentation, you spent a lot of time transcribing what looks to me to be illegible writing. And those, I mean, that is absolutely incredible that you did that work. Is that now archived? Is that part of an archive that can be shared? Because that work alone is just unbelievable and precious. And then adding the layer of your own work on top of that. How is this data managed and how is it accessed?
Yes, thank you. So the archives themselves, like the access to the archives and the scans and the transcription, it was done as part of the Matobo program. So and so the archives they belong to a private person. So it's something I can't really decide. Something that has to be discussed, like to know who we have to ask the authorization and how to get the authorization and stuff like this. So it's something that has to be discussed with the whole program I was part of. And how it's accessible, it's not accessible, it's on my computer. Yeah. But so that's why I was saying the way forward would be to make it compatible and to upload it on a system that can be used by others. Yeah. So that's why I was saying it's something it's better to think about it before. I didn't really hear about this free online and like open science when I started my PhD, or I wasn't sensitive to it, maybe, I don't know. But it's something that came after, and it was like too late. Like I used FileMaker Pro for the database, and it's not compatible with anything.
If I may add one sentence on this one, actually, Nick Walker's personal archives were given to Guillaume and myself by a private person. So that's the reason why it's not made accessible yet, because now we're in the process of officially giving it to some institutions, and we don't know whether it's going to be UZ, University of Zimbabwe, or the NMMZ. So we are on the process. And in the end, hopefully it's going to be accessible to the public.
Hi, Camille. I've got a comment there as well.
Yeah, I don't know who's talking, but
It's Sam.
It's Sam. I'm sorry, I don't see you. I only see a thank you on the screen. So please add your comment, and then we're going to have 3 more questions.
Well, no, I was just going to say that for any anything archival or image-wise that Léa and you and Guillaume want to make available online, obviously with the correct levels of access and permissions, please do also consider Arada. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. Don, you stole my comment because I wanted to comment on the writing and writing. I would have struggled to read that. But the main point I want to highlight here to begin with is I have a lot more joy going through museum records. You get to appreciate how detailed researchers used to be when they were recording, sites. I remember sitting at Natal Museum, for my PhD, going through a lot of site records, and it also shows you the thinking of the time. How detailed people used to be in counting how many inlands, how many this and that, and describing the sequence, what is over what, and all of that. I have 2 questions for you. You talked about establishing a chronostylistic sequence of rock art. And maybe I just didn't understand your presentation well, especially towards the end. I don't have an appreciation of how you want to achieve that in terms of the location you were working at, where you said there were 1,400, I'm rounding off, 1,400 motifs. I don't have an appreciation of how you wanted to do that chronological sequence of time. But then my second question, also linked to that, is you then want to do a chronological relationship between the different images. Now, how do you do that when you have no dates? And you don't have a good appreciation of the time that might have elapsed between one motif being painted against another. How do we achieve that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I didn't detail it here because I didn't have enough time, but chronostylistic sequence. So to document the sequence, it was on the field. So it was in the 62 sites that we visited. When there was motifs superimposed, like on top of each other, I recorded it. And because I had the description of the motifs, okay, each motif were described by 4 of the stylistic features, so their technique, their shape, their theme, and their composition. So there was a whole grid that was established before. Each motifs were described with all of this. And by crossing all these variables, I could establish what I called stylistic categories. So for example, it would be realistic polychrome elands or outlined caricatural elephants, like categories like this. And then I took my superimposition sequences and I checked like which motifs belong to which category. And then I compared all the sequences, I had 67 sequences, to see if there was repetition in the superimposition. For example, all the caricatural motifs were always on top of the realistic ones. Because we never found, until the time we find it, we never found caricatural motif or outline motif that were under the realistic. So we assume that this was made by people who came after, but it's then I come to your dating. I can't say how long after, yeah.
Just one quick comment. You might want to read the debate between Tembi Russell and David Pierce over the use of Harris matrix in Rockart. Patricia Vinicombe also, touches on this aspect, in People of the Eland in terms of the sequencing. Yeah, but it's a very difficult subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Léa, for your presentation. So I wanted to come back to Tim Ingold. And as well, he really stressed the importance of learning by doing and walking as a way of knowing. So my question is, can really a bird view, this kind of bird views and dots on a map and really inform us about social experiences? And whose social experiences are we talking about? Is it the one of the people who made the painting and used it, or is it the one of Nick Walker? And is social experiences really the right word, or should we rather talk about sensitive experiences?
GIS was really a tool that allowed first to reassess the different variables to make the fieldwork more efficient, because everything I modelized on GIS was then checked on the field. so it pre-did the work I did on the field to be more efficient and to allow to cover more sites and more diversity of sites. And it was also used not really as a way to say this is the experience, this is exactly what they used to see, or this is exactly the path they must have been taken. It was more a way to compare the sites between each other, because like if a site is at the top of a hill, whether it take them 1 hour or 30 minutes, it will always take them more time than a site that would be at the bottom of one hill. So it was really based on this to have a way to compare the sites between each other. I don't know if this answers your question.
Last question.
Thank you for that presentation. You did say earlier that some of the archival data was on private hands, and I was wondering whether you meant that it's still available and accessible somehow. I'm interested in just you clarifying that bit. The other thing is, since Nick Walker is still alive, do you ever meet him to say, hey, you did a great job or whatever, some conversation? Thank you. Otherwise, lovely presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh yeah, no, the private hand. So it's. I think he gave it to a friend of him, basically. Yeah. So yeah, it's like a person who's not necessarily an archaeologist, was just his friend in Zimbabwe. And yes, I went to see him to do my little fangirl and say, oh, I love your work. And yeah, but it was it was very private thing. Like it wasn't really to work, to ask him work questions. It was really to come and acknowledge him and meet him. And yeah, because we had been in contact by email a bit. So yeah, I was driving by during my holiday and I thought I can't not go see him. Yeah.
Thanks very much.